the Second World War and afterwards, the Korean War, they're gone.
We're waited too late, folks. We're going to have to deal with what we got, right? We're going to get these two guys in here talking to you.
Oh, and sometimes it's not even UFOs. Barry Greenwood here, he found first Marine Air Wing records for the Korean War. The weekly intelligence summaries. Not only did they have unidentified aircraft, they had a category saying UFO, and so during the Korean War, if you go to the First Air Marine Wing intelligence summaries, you will find plenty of UFOs during the Korean War in Korea or around the area, Japan and in the area where the conflict was taking place. And that didn't come about by FOIA. It was just Korean War veterans got the Marines to release these records because they had it was an intelligence document. It had the summaries of actions, especially air actions. But like I said, there's also UFO reports contained in there, and that was not found by any ufologists. Barry actually found it online, but the veterans were the ones that got it released.
Well, we want to work with the veteran organizations and all those that aren't in them, because I meet a lot of when I worked with the AMVETs and they were trying to get me in the office to do more. I did help different groups, but the states, and it's hard to explain, but what we found out is a lot of people are willing to help, but they need people to tell them what they need to do and where they need to be to do it once they're retired military, or civil service, or service of any kind, police, firemen, anybody that's been willing to help their community in their locations, but they just need to know. It's sort of like first responders. We need to get it organized. So maybe part of it is because we don't care if you're red, white, blue, brown, yellow, or if your name's Smith or Sam is Monagich, right? Or whatever. The thing is, we have people on the planet, and we call them boots on the ground, that if you're not in space, but you believe we ought to be there, you're space advocates, can you help volunteer if you got time? And, most of the people that are out here in all these groups and fellowship groups, a lot of them were the same people. I mean, I've got the intelligence on it because I was put in all these groups through ACIR to learn how they all do it and why they do it and the causes. And I can't get everybody to agree on one page as to what they want to do, but you and me are prior military, and so is Ken and Ahmad. And we all can see the solution is, of course, just get the job done. And KISS, keep it simple, stupid. But there's a lot of people, but they've got to know where to go. So now that we've got the internet, all right, and I found you thanks to Bruce, and you found Barry thanks to you. Barry, did you find Barry or did Barry find you?
Found me. I think I tripped over him one day.
Okay, so
and he's been bossing me around since then.
All right. Well, we don't have.
Hello, this is Barry. I can explain that.
Oh, really? Let's get a little history here. Go ahead. We're up.
It must have been around 1995. Is that right, Jan? He was on a project to try to locate all the press coverage he could on 1947, not just press coverage, but anything really about the 1947 flying saucer wave. which really it only lasted, I think, a couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks or so, and then it just died as quickly as it started. And oddly enough, you're aware of the Roswell incident, and it's presented in the media now as the major event of 1947, but it really wasn't. It was at the tail end of that whole wave of activity. It started with a pilot, Kenneth Arnold, who said he had seen these strange objects flitting around Mount Rainier, and when he landed, he reported this, and the press went crazy. Somehow they were looking for a good story, and that satisfied their needs. So that sighting, when it was reported, kicked off a whole wave of other people seeing flying saucers in the sky in varying quantities, anywhere from one to dozens or even hundreds. But it was only towards the end of that wave of activity when Roswell was reported on July 8th, and it was very quickly dismissed the next morning. The papers carried all sorts of disclaimers about it, and that pretty much killed the wave. There were still some sighting reports coming out, but it just died. And there really wasn't a whole lot of activity after that until, the summer of 1948. Actually, earlier, there was an incident involving a pilot who was killed chasing a UFO, and Thomas Mantell, and that's a very famous incident. That happened in January of that year. But there were a few outbursts of activity in 48, and then it again quieted down until 1950. So really, the history is perceived as rather differently than what actually happened by people now. And that has to be made clear to folks. But anyway, getting back to Jan, he was trying to research 1947, and out of the blue he called me because he knew I was doing historical work and press searches and all, and he wanted to compare notes. And initially I was a little suspicious because I hadn't heard much about Jan, and I didn't know who he was. And for all I knew, he could have been another nut trying to extract information.
Oh, you mean he's not? Okay, we'll take your word for it.
I didn't know he's not nuts, but I thought he might have been. So the more I dealt with him, the more I realized he was very serious about this. And then I realized that it was a pretty good project he was involved with, so I cooperated with him. And the way it worked out, Jan would get funding to go on trips across North America. And when he did that, he would accumulate quite a bit of information, but he couldn't carry it all with him. So he would send it along to me to cut and paste. They were all raw sheets of data, and they had to be sifted down and pasted up into an orderly fashion. So he would periodically do this and send the stuff along, and by the time we knew it, I think we had about 3 banker boxes full of press clippings from all over the place.
Wow, you're professional clippers, huh?
Well, yeah, you had to be at that time. I mean, that was before the internet, too. So we had to actually go out to the libraries and photocopy these things.
Well, that's what we should do with the professional journalist I'm in. We got the SPJ.org, Society of Professional Journalists, has trained some of our young kids coming into our weekly newspapers, if any of them are still out there. But, if we can keep any of our history, but keep going with your story. But you're giving me ideas because you mentioned that, and we did used to keep everything. But some of them, you'd go into the little towns in genealogy, or like me, a reporter, investigator, looking in the old files, and they weren't there, or they didn't even microfiche them, right? So you're right.
Well, I attribute a lot of credit to genealogists, because I think if it wasn't for them, there wouldn't be half the motivation to make the press available.
Oh,
the only reason we had access to it was because of the high demand by genealogists looking into family and other people's backgrounds. So
Wonderful.
we sort of rode on the coattails of that with the UFO reports. And I remember the first time I subscribed to a clipping service, I told the fellow what I wanted him to look for, and he kind of paused and said, well, that's different. He said, I never had anyone ask for that before. And I said, well, you do now.
Wow.
And they started looking for that information for us. But, soon after the internet came along.
What
and
is that, Barry?
I think my first attempt to get a clip service was, that was 1974. And I kept that until about 1986. And then I had to give it up because of costs. It's quite expensive to have an old clipping service like that.
But you've got a history, 50 years of history, so that's good, because I remember I had Gigi in 1974, and she just passed away. So I had my daughter during that whole time. But now that's good, though, because you're giving us, now you can go back and do a history of clipping services, but then would they be able to help us know if there's still like records, just like the government? We've got all these auxiliary people that aren't in any of the vet groups, but they may be willing to help us. But give us an idea of clip service. When did they come in? You're saying you helped start the UFO clipping of just one agency?
Yeah, no, Jan, we were working together on finding clippings manually ourselves, but clipping services have been used since the beginning of collecting flying saucer reports. The Air Force had actually subscribed to a service in 1952 when they were inundated. That gave them a lot of information with which to investigate. And it was at a good time, too, because the Air Force had generally been hostile to the subject, but for the period from late 51 to 53, they were overseen by a captain, Edward Ruppelt, who was rather favorable towards investigations into the subject. So he brought them up a notch, and it really showed in 1952 when you didn't see the usual debunking of UFO reports during that time. They were wide open to getting anyone and everyone to tell them what was going on in the skies.
Now, that was Ruppelt and Kehoe, Don Kehoe, too, down in that area, right?
Well, yeah, Ruppelt, he worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for Blue Book. It was essentially in a Quonset hut. It was nothing fancy like an office building, as a lot of people may think. It was just an operation to monitor reports and try to explain as many as possible. That was the Air Force's goal, to make sure it wasn't a national security problem. And you do that by debunking, dismissing reports. The good stuff, I think, meaning reports that were very hard to explain by normal means, probably went through other channels. And we'd like to know about those, wherever those were sent. I think a lot of that has been suppressed and unavailable, and part of what we're trying to do is dig those out, too.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Great job. I need to let these two guys here, Thomas Becker and Ken R. Johnston, get in on this historical oral event, because this is quite historical, folks. You probably have no idea what this means to the future, but this is what we're working towards. And the Allied Command is going to be on the backs of Jan Aldrich, Barry Greenwood, Thomas Becker, and Ken Johnston right now, to bring together the Allied Command for the entire world here in the United States of America, because we've got to have a think tank to get people knowing how to get forward on a structure, an infrastructure, not just for bridges and power, I guess, but on history. And these two gentlemen are called ufologists, Jan Aldrich and Barry Greenwood, and we're going to be the support team, but we're creating an auxiliary so we can at least start with a who's who directory, as well as a list of links. And then we can't do everybody's RSS feed, but as long as my money holds out till we get some more people to help us at like $2 a month or something, that just say, I'm not going to go get in the dust and papers, I'm dust mite allergic, but I'll send you $2. So we're thinking about that. I don't get the money, neither does Ken or Thomas